we're just continuing with thousands of years of tradition. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking you through the best books that I read in 2023 which were written by Irish authors. Of the 127 books that I read last year, 14 of them were written by an Irish author, which isn't really a lot, but it did give me quite a bit of scope where I could go and pick out from, but I have gotten the absolute cream of the crop for you here. We'll start with what was not only the best book by an Irish author that I read in 2023, but which was also undeniably my favourite book of the entire year, and that was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. This was Liz's most recent release, and I have absolutely loved her books up to here. I've only had a bad experience with one of them, which was Unraveling Oliver, and that was her debut. So I think she was just kind of finding her niche, she was just finding her voice, but this one completely blew me away. As you can picture from the title, this book is about Sally Diamond, who is a little bit strange. She lives with her father on a very small farm in rural Ireland. Her mother passed away years before the events of the book take place. And Sally remembers that when she was younger, her father used to always tell her that when he died, he didn't want a big fuss, he didn't want a big funeral, he just wanted to be brought out and put out with the rubbish. So, when Sally's father does pass away, she honours his wishes and just puts him in with the farm's incinerator. Unfortunately, this does grab a lot of attention from the townspeople, and some of them ring the guards, which is the Irish police force, and that starts an entire media circus around Sally and her life. But also she finds out that her parents had adopted her, and she came from a completely different background than what she had expected to. I've had this book described to me, and I actually completely agree with this, is if Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, and if Room by Anna O'Donoghue had a baby together. This is kind of an amalgamation of the story of those two books put in together. And it really stretches across the entire world. It doesn't just take place in that little tiny village in Ireland. It also brings us right around to New Zealand when one of the characters has left Ireland to set up a new life there. And you realise that things are not exactly as they seem when this person takes off to a new country. I was completely gripped by this book. It is quite dark, and you do need to have a bit of a good humour going into it because it can be quite dark and it can be quite depressing. But if it is something that you feel like you are able to reach for, I genuinely recommend that you pick it up. My second best book of 2023 also came from an Irish author, and that was The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is following Rachel, who is about 18 or 19. She lives in Cork, and this is set in around 2009 to 2010. Ireland is going through the same global depression that every other country was going through. Finances are not doing super well, both in terms of the government and people's personal finances. There's a discussion throughout this book of people having to go without a holiday that they would have gone on every single year up to then, or Christmas presents not being as extravagant for family as they would have been in the past. To earn a little bit of money and to take some of the financial pressure off her parents, Rachel gets a part-time job in a kind of a bookshop in Cork, and she strikes up a friendship with James, who's one of the other sales assistants there. Rachel is also studying in UCC, and she regales James with stories of her crush on her professor, Dr. Byrne, and the kind of dreams that she has about their life together and the things that she would love to do to him. At a book launch at the shop one night, things take an unexpected turn when Fred and James actually meet each other for the first time. What follows in this book is an entire effort to keep a relationship under subterfuge, mainly because there are two reasons that people would not be super welcoming to it. There's also quite a lot of resentment between Rachel and James throughout this book, which goes through ebbs and flows. Sometimes they are each other's best friend and confidant, and sometimes they can't even stand to be in the same room as one another. There are also some passages with Fred's wife, who is completely blindsided by everything that is going on in the rest of this book. It also does deal with abortion and with an unexpected and unwanted pregnancy, which I thought was done so well, especially because it was based around the time of the abortion referendum in Ireland and the huge kind of turmoil that the country was going through, where quite a lot of people would have been turned against friends or against family members because they were finding out that people's opinions on this weren't as they wanted them to be or as expected them to be. I think a big reason that this book spoke to me so much is because of the setting. I grew up very near Cork. It's in the south of Ireland, and I grew up about an hour away from Cork City. It's where my family and I would go Christmas shopping every single year, for example, or on the last day of the school holidays, we would always go to Cork and go shopping and have dinner and get ice cream. So I think walking around the streets of Cork with Rachel and James, it just brought me back home in a way that another book hasn't done since. It was really good to kind of relive that situation. In around 2008, 2009, I would have been about 16 or 17. So I wouldn't have been exactly at the same age that Rachel and James are at, but I would have been somewhere around that line. That I would also have experiences of my parents having to make savings where things had been going okay before, now they have to cut back on it. Or have you considered not doing this anymore because we can't afford to do it? It's something that almost every family in the country was going through, and it really was a unifying experience. So reading about it again, it just kind of felt like I was back in there. I also really enjoyed 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. I hadn't read any of Catherine Ryan Howard's books before, so I was a little bit concerned as to what was going to happen in here. I didn't know if the writing style would work for me. I didn't know if her storytelling would work. I have been pretty impressed with her so far. This book is set in early 2020, so it is quite heavy on the pandemic. If that is something that you are not still able to read about, I would give this one a swerve for a little bit longer. But if you are okay with reading about pandemic books, this is about Ciara and Oliver, who have actually both moved to Dublin recently before the lockdown starts in Ireland, and get to know each other in the queue of a Tesco one day, strike up a conversation, and decide to go out on a couple of dates. As the 13th of March looms, which is the date that Ireland went into its first lockdown, Ciara and Oliver decide that they're going to give their fledgling relationship a chance. They're going to move in together. I think it's into Ciara's apartment. They're going to give it a try. They're going to see how well they get along with each other. And that is when things start to take a turn. Of course, with the lockdown happening and with a lot of people pretty much confined to their homes on an hourly basis, there was a lot of chance for Ciara and Oliver to get to know each other, but there was also a lot of chance for them to figure out things that the other had been hiding, or to learn things about the other that they maybe weren't expecting to learn. As somebody who is Irish, but didn't spend any of the pandemic or the early lockdowns in Ireland, it was actually really interesting to see how it had affected everyday people, how it was affecting people's lives, having to kind of queue up to go into the grocery store, having to wear masks everywhere that you go. For example, Ciara and Oliver go out one day to a big Tesco, which is what we would basically call one of the bigger supermarkets. They have to go out to one that's a little bit further away from their home, which didn't particularly make sense to me because I did think, surely there's a closer one to Harold's Cross than the one that they went to. I thought that they would go to here, for example. But it was really interesting to see this whole alien life that we had to live back then and how it was actually affecting everyday people. Something that I genuinely enjoyed about this book is the subterfuge and the kind of figuring out things about Ciara and Oliver as the book continues. The title 56 Days comes from the fact that 56 days after Ciara and Oliver have first met each other, one of them is found dead on the floor of the apartment that they've moved into. And there are a whole cast of side characters who you meet and who you get to know, and you have to kind of figure out what is the relationship between Ciara and Oliver, and then Leah and her partner, I think his name was Kieran. You have to try and figure out if there is a connection between them, and if there is at all, what is it? This book genuinely did take me in a direction that I was not expecting to go in. I completely thought that I had figured this out, and then Catherine Ryan Howard said, no you don't, and brought me down an absolutely different avenue. I cannot wait to see what her other books are going to be like. Next up is a children's book, and that is Sally in the City of Dreams by Judy Curtin. This book is about Sally and her sister Bridget, who leave Ireland for New York. I think it's around 1911 that they head off. And this book is actually semi-autobiographical. It isn't about Judy Curtin leaving Ireland herself, but her grandmother, who had also left Cork in, I think, also around 1911, and headed for the US to start a new life. Back in the 1900s in Ireland, things were not going very well. The country was in basic poverty, and emigration was high. Even still 50 or so years after the famine, People were still leaving Ireland in their droves, heading off to America, heading off to England, and sending back money to everyone that had been left behind. While Sally and Bridget are on the ship over to the US, they meet with a young girl called Julia, who is also going over to the USA in order to find her older brother and to start her own new life with him as well. When they get to New York, they decide that rather than going straight to their mother's cousin house, which is where they were going to be staying for the next while, Sally and Bridget are going to help Julia to find her brother and to get her sorted out, because he hasn't turned up at the pier where he said that he would be to meet her. However, when they get to the address that Julia was given, it turns out that her brother Sonny is absolutely nowhere to be found. Sally and Bridget convince their cousin Catherine, who is absolutely awful, to move in with them, to make the room a little bit more cramped and crowded, but to give them a little bit more of a feeling of camaraderie together. They also go out and find new jobs. For example, Bridget is a nanny for a well-to-do family in the area, whereas Sally is working in, I think it's like a small department store. It's not quite Macy's, but it is kind of high up there. And Julia is just working as a seamstress or as a cleaner. One day, things start to go a little bit haywire and the law gets involved, and everything starts to look a little bit ropey as to whether or not Sally, Bridget, and Julia are even going to live out their New York dreams at all. I've really enjoyed this book. I haven't read a lot of children's books recently, but this one completely blew me away. It is a historical fiction book, so it did speak to one of the genres that I really enjoyed. And it also touches quite heavily on immigration, which is obviously a topic that I am very interested in. At the back of the paperback copy, there's also a little bit of a fact file about Judy Curtin's grandmother who went over to the US, and then there's a little bit of information about what Ireland was like at the time, why so many people went over, and what would have happened to them when they did. If there are kids in your life who are interested in history or interested in emigration in any kind of a way, or who want to learn a little bit more about Irish culture, this is definitely one to put in their hands. In a surprise to many people, myself included, there is a fantasy book on this list. In October, I read All Our Hidden Gifts by Caroline O'Donoghue, and I was so blown away by how much I enjoyed it. I went in with fairly low expectations because I knew it was a fantasy book. Even if it was a fairly low-key, low fantasy book, I still wasn't sure how I was going to translate to the pages. This book is about Maeve, who is given a school detention one day where she is tasked to clean out one of the cupboards in the school. During her work, she finds a pack of tarot cards and then sets up a little business in the school, giving everybody readings about what their life is going to be like and what their future holds, and starts getting genuinely into tarot reading. One day, Lily, who used to be Maeve's best friend, but they haven't particularly spoken in a couple of years, she comes up to Maeve and asks for a reading and draws out a card called the Housekeeper that nobody has ever seen before. Maeve hasn't even found anything about it on her studies. When Lily starts to push back against Maeve's abilities, Maeve says out loud that she wishes that Lily would just disappear. The next day, Lily is discovered to have gone missing. What follows is Maeve's good friend Fiona, who had actually been organising a lot of the tarot readings for Maeve, and Lily's sibling Ro, going out and trying to find out what the Housekeeper card means, the kind of a group that it stands for, and how they're going to get Lily back. Something that I genuinely enjoyed about this book is the kind of a social commentary discussion about the Catholic Church's loosening grip on Ireland as a whole. Over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of social change in Ireland where we have kind of strayed away from the traditional Catholic views people would have seen us with. We have legalised same-sex marriages, for example. We have legalised abortion, which were both very heavily condemned by the Catholic Church and enshrined into the country's constitution. But I feel like a lot of people in the US, especially very religious people in the US, would have seen Ireland as this kind of conservative utopia where the church is basically the governing system of the entire land and everything the Catholic Church says is enshrined into the constitution, which had been true up to about 10 or so years ago, and now people are starting to kind of draw away from church altogether. Reading that and knowing all of the social change that Ireland has gone through, and also seeing how close that Maeve and Ro and Fiona had become with each other, and also reading Ro's discovery of his sexuality and of his gender identity, it was genuinely such an interesting book for me to read. I can't wait to get to the next 2 books in this series. I know that they are in my library in Berlin, and I have got my sights on the 2 of them for October this year. Finally, another book that I love which spoke to Ireland's social history is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I read this for my book club back in November, and admittedly, if it hadn't been for that, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. So I am really glad that the majority of people went for this book, because it would have slipped through the cracks otherwise. This book is about Furlong, who is married to his wife Eileen, and they have, I think it's 5 daughters. Things are getting a little bit tight financially. It's set in the 1980s, which was another time of financial oppression in Ireland. Our Taoiseach Charlie Haughey, which is the Prime Minister in Irish government, had described Ireland and Irish people as living way beyond our means. And that is pretty much what was happening in Ireland. People were not able to sustain the lifestyles that they had had previously. People were emigrating in their droves outside of Ireland, which is happening again, but not quite to the numbers that people would have in the 1980s. Furlong works as a coal miner and as a coal driver, so every single day of the week apart from Sunday he is delivering coal to everyone in the community. One day he is delivering them to a local building, and he is struck by the scenes that he finds here. There are a bunch of younger women who are all basically doing an amount of housework or cleaning up, hanging out laundry, doing laundry in the first place. And he's not entirely sure that he's happy with how this is going. He strikes up a conversation with one of the girls, and she starts to kind of enamor herself to him. Not in any kind of a strange way, just that he finds her story and her situation a little bit of a thinker. Another day when he is delivering another batch of coal to the convent, he sees the same girl locked up in a coal shed, and she asks him innocently if he will help her ask the nuns to help find her baby. It's at this stage that Furlong understands that this is one of the mother and baby homes that plagued Ireland up until 1996. They were seen as a place to send young women who had become pregnant out of wedlock for any reason at all. And they were seen as a source of shame to the families of these girls, and that these places were the only way for them to earn their penance. Ireland's social history is one that has always interested me. I never got a chance to study it at school, and it is something that I still regret to this day. We never got to that part of the syllabus when we were studying for our exams, and I really wish that we had had the chance even to just look over it for a cursory 10 minutes or so. I've always been so interested in the social history of Ireland and how we got to the place that we are today in terms of our values and in terms of our understandings and in terms of the way that we act and that we think about others. So reading this book was a genuinely really interesting one for me here. Something else that I really enjoyed about this book is that it is set in Wexford, which is really close to the county of Waterford, which is where I grew up. There are actually mentions of Waterford City as well, because Furlong's wife and their 5 daughters go to Waterford one day and they do some Christmas shopping there, which was really interesting, and it was just a really nice touch of home as well. But another really nice touch of home, and something else that was rather prevalent along the first part of this book, was that Furlong's wife Sarah spends quite a lot of time baking a Christmas cake, which can take up to a week to get right. That is something that my grandmother still does to this day, and it was just a really nice reminder of home and of my family. My one criticism about this book is that it is just a little too short, and it cuts off right as you can see something is about to happen. It cuts off right as something big is happening, and I really wish that we had seen what had come from there. It has just recently been made into a film starring Cillian Murphy, and it premiered at the Berlinale Film Festival about a week or 2 ago, and I really wish that I had known about it a little bit earlier so that I would have been able to get tickets to it. But if there is another way that I can go and see it, I will definitely go and watch this one, and I truly think you should go and read this book too. Those are all of the books by Irish authors that truly captured my heart in 2023. Have you read any Irish authors in 2023, or do you have any coming up in your 2024 reading plans? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the green book emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.